Elias Wren pressed the edge of his boot against the crumbling floor panel, testing its stability with the grim patience of a man who had already fallen through 2 ceilings this week. The moon base around him groaned like it had indigestion, which, given the layers of toxic gas pockets trapped beneath its crust, wasn't far from the truth. Somewhere above, atmospheric storms grumbled like cosmic stomachaches, casting flickers of green lightning across the faded hulls of abandoned transport ships. Diplomacy, Elias reflected, had never smelled this much like burnt coolant and fungus. "Tell me again why we couldn't meet at a proper conference center," he muttered into the dim air, brushing ash from the lapel of his coat. A voice behind him answered, laced with honey and mild derision. "Because your people insisted on neutral ground, and Virinians are nothing if not accommodating." He turned to face Queen Thaladra of Virinus, whose idea of diplomatic wear appeared to be ceremonial armor, lined with polished bone and a dagger longer than Elias's forearm. Her long ears, graceful arcs of cartilage crowned with obsidian tips, twitched slightly as she approached, her golden hair woven into tight braids that shimmered in the flickering emergency lights. She was, to put it mildly, intimidating. Also, Elias was nearly certain she'd smiled once since they met, although he might have imagined it. "We've repurposed worse spaces," he offered, gesturing toward a cracked console whose screen displayed only the word error in 6 languages. "Reminds me of my first apartment." Thaladra raised an eyebrow. "Was it also haunted by failed peace treaties?" "No, just rats. And my neighbor, Gerald, who played the bagpipes at 3 in the morning. Equally tragic." She didn't laugh, but her mouth quirked at the corner. Progress. The room they occupied had once been a communications nexus. Now it was little more than a bunker with aspirations. Elias had to duck under exposed wiring that sparked whenever someone breathed too hard. Thaladra, taller and less willing to bend, had simply sliced the lower cables clean. No ceremony, no warning. Just a humming blade and a shrug. "Shall we begin?" she said now, gesturing to a jury-rigged table set between 2 upturned crates. Elias nodded and pulled out his datapad, flipping through files and encrypted messages sent by Earth Command. Most of them were useless. Demands disguised as diplomacy, threats couched in polite phrasing, and one memo about a mandatory morale seminar he was scheduled to attend next month. He briefly considered forwarding that one to Thaladra as a joke, but she was still armed and possibly not fluent in sarcasm. Thaladra sat with the grace of a panther, eyeing a meal. "I read your terms. I assumed you would. Thoughts?" "Yes. Your planetary council believes my people will agree to disarm in exchange for trade agreements and seasonal tourism privileges? Don't knock the lunar vineyards. They've won awards. Have they survived the war? Well, technically no, but the grapes are hauntingly memorable." She stared at him, then blinked. "You're serious." "Only when the occasion demands it, and sometimes not even then." She leaned forward, elbows on the table, the gleam in her eyes somewhere between predatory and curious. "Why are you here, Elias Wren?" "Not officially. I've read your file. I know your titles and commendations and that unfortunate incident with the diplomatic robe fire." "That was one time," he said, a little too defensively. "And in my defense, the candles were badly placed." Her expression didn't change. "Still, you're not a soldier. You're not a politician. And yet you walk into enemy space with a lopsided grin and a briefcase full of obsolete treaties." He met her gaze. "Because I'm tired of counting the dead, and because someone has to be the idiot who tries." That finally earned a real smile. A small one, tight at the corners, but unmistakable. It was like watching a glacier admit it had feelings. "Then let us try, idiot diplomat," she said, "but I will not surrender my people's pride for an empty peace." "Good. I wasn't planning to surrender mine either, but I was hoping we might trade a little of it for breathing room." For the next hour they spoke in the coded dance of negotiation, offers masked as suggestions, insults tucked into compliments, truce revealed between long silences. The war had scarred both of them, but in different ways. Thaladra's voice hardened when she spoke of Varinian colonies glassed by orbital bombardments. Elias's hands shook, just slightly, when recounting the hospital ship ambushed over Terena's belt. They did not agree. Not yet. But they listened. A tremor rolled through the floor, rattling the cracked tiles. "Another storm?" Elias asked. Taladra glanced at a wall panel, its ancient circuitry flickering like an annoyed firefly. "Or someone found our meeting." The lights died. Total blackness. Elias's first thought was that he really should have installed that flashlight implant. His second thought was that he might be about to die in the middle of a joke. "Don't suppose you brought backup?" he asked. "I am the backup," Taladra replied. A flash of light burst from her palm as she activated a portable emitter, revealing the doorway behind them crumpled inward like foil. Something growled, metallic, wet, and far too close. Elias fumbled for his sidearm, which he had absolutely forgotten to charge this morning. "I thought this was neutral ground," he whispered. Taladra drew her blade. It was, until someone changed the rules. From the shadows crawled a thing, four-legged, spined, and drooling radiation. A syndicate predator drone, built for close-quarters extermination. Elias aimed and clicked. Nothing. Taladra didn't wait. She surged forward with a roar, blades singing as it met steel. The fight was swift, brutal, and highly educational for Elias, who learned three important things. 1. Virinian queens were terrifying in combat. 2. He should always charge his weapon. And 3. The drone exploded when its head was removed. Covered in scorched metal and faintly glowing ichor, Taladra turned to him. "Still believe in breathing room?" He wheezed. "Only if it comes with hazard pay." She smiled again, wider this time. "You might yet survive, Elias Wren." He picked up the smoldering piece of his briefcase. "That makes one of us." The cramped interior of the escape pod smelled of recycled air and old regrets, a combination that made Elias seriously reconsider his life choices. He sat cross-legged on the cold metal floor, staring at a blinking console that offered no useful data, just a blinking light that mocked him like a cosmic metronome. Beside him, Queen Taladra lounged against the bulkhead, arms folded, the faint gleam of her armor catching the dim red emergency glow. Her long ears twitched in irritation, or perhaps it was just the pod's clunky life support messing with her sensors. "Do you think they'll come looking for us?" Elias asked, voice echoing softly in the confined space. Taladra didn't answer immediately. She was busy poking at a panel with a fingertip, causing sparks to flicker and nearly setting off the onboard fire suppression system. "Depends," she finally said, "on whether your species enjoys counting corpses or prefers live bargaining chips." Elias snorted. "So either way, I'm doomed." "Fantastic." She smirked in that dangerous smile that suggested she was already calculating escape routes and probably plotting ways to blame him when they failed. "At least you're honest." They had escaped the assassination attempt by diving into the old maintenance tunnels of the moon base, a labyrinth of rusted conduits and shadowy passages where no sane creature would voluntarily wander. The only reason they were still alive was a mixture of luck, stubbornness, and Taladra's unsettling ability to move like a shadow, quiet, swift, and completely alien. Elias's role mostly involved tripping over cables and trying not to make too much noise. Now trapped in the pod, their options were limited. The last transmission from their allies had been scrambled beyond recognition, and the war outside raged like a bad fever. The silence between them stretched, punctuated by the pod's mechanical hum and Elias's occasional cough. "You know," he said, breaking the quiet, "I never thought I'd be stuck in a tin can with an alien queen and not at least get a medal for it." Taladra's eyes flicked toward him, amused. "If you survive, the stories alone should win you a dozen honors, or at least a participation trophy." Elias chuckled, imagining a galactic ceremony where he'd be handed a shiny plaque, while a bureaucrat read out his mishaps in excruciating detail. "I can see it now. For bravery in the face of utter incompetence." "You underestimate yourself. You're annoyingly resourceful." He shrugged. "Annoying is my middle name. Unfortunately, I left my resourcefulness at the last bar on Vega Prime." A sudden lurch threw them both off balance as the pod shuddered violently. Elias grabbed a nearby handhold, cursing softly. "Status report?" he asked. Taladra tapped the console again, which responded with a harsh beep and then silence. "We are drifting. Possibly into hostile territory. Possibly into a debris field. Possibly directly into a black hole." Elias sighed. Perfect. They fell into a companionable silence, the kind forged by shared peril and awkward proximity. Elias took a deep breath, realizing that despite their differences, the war, their species, the fact that her ears looked like delicate antennas, he found himself strangely comfortable next to her. She wasn't just the queen of a warring race. She was real, complex, frustrating in all the best ways. I never asked, he said softly, what it's like. Being queen, I mean. Thaladra's gaze turned inward, a brief flicker of vulnerability passing over her features. It is not a title. It is a burden. My people expect strength, but strength is not always visible. Sometimes it is in knowing when to bend, when to sacrifice, when to survive with honor. Sounds exhausting. It is. And lonely. Ilias swallowed. I thought being a diplomat was tough. She laughed, a rich, unexpected sound that bounced off the pod's walls. You would laugh less if you had to answer every complaint before breakfast and still pretend to enjoy the worst synthesized coffee in the quadrant. He grinned. So basically, we're both miserable. Misery has company, she said, her tone lighter. A crackle interrupted them as the pod's communication system sparked to life, a weak transmission weaving through static. Elias, Thaladra, if you're alive, meet at coordinate gamma 7 theta. Trust no one else. Elias looked at her. Sounds like someone wants to keep this war going. Thaladra nodded grimly. The Syndicate of Cinders. They profit from bloodshed and shadows. Well, they just earned themselves a new enemy, Elias said, punching the pod's controls with more hope than skill. We'll need a plan. She regarded him with a wry smile. And a lot of luck. Lucky us, he muttered. The pod jolted again, this time throwing them closer together. Elias caught her arm reflexively. Sorry. She glanced down at his hand. No apologies. If the war ends, I suspect this will be the closest we get to peace. Elias held her gaze. Maybe peace starts in the strangest places. Or with the strangest alliances, she said softly. They settled into the uneasy quiet again, knowing the next moves would be dangerous and uncertain. But for the first time since the war began, the thought of tomorrow carried a faint spark of something beyond survival. Hope. The hangar bay smelled of oil, ozone, and the faint trace of burnt toast. A breakfast failure somewhere deep in the complex, or maybe the residue of another barely dodged explosion. Elias rubbed the sleep out of his eyes as the docking clamps released their grip with a pneumatic hiss. Queen Thaladra stood by the ship's entrance, her silhouette framed against the streaking stars, long ears angled sharply as if tuning in to some secret cosmic frequency. Impressive landing, if I say so myself, Elias quipped as he stepped aboard the ship, though I'm not sure the autopilot appreciated the 3-point turn in zero gravity. Thaladra raised an eyebrow but said nothing, her gaze fixed on the navigation console, blinking erratically. Systems are not optimized for interstellar ballet, she replied, voice dry, much like your species' diplomatic skills. That's rich coming from the queen who just commandeered a stolen freighter. Details. The ship groaned as it powered up, a patchwork of scavenged tech and stubborn determination. Elias tapped his comm badge, connecting to the ship's AI, which promptly responded in a voice that sounded like a caffeinated librarian. Welcome aboard, Captain Wren. Systems nominal. Please do not feed the servobots. Noted, Elias said, looking at the cluster of blinking lights and emergency kits that were definitely not organized according to any standard protocol. They were hurtling toward the neutral zone, a dead sector of space where diplomacy was supposed to thrive, though in practice, it was more like a cosmic limbo where deals died and spies lounged with dangerously sharp smiles. The Syndicate of Cinders had eyes everywhere, and their latest message had been clear. Trust no one, especially those with impeccable taste in starship aesthetics. Thaladra swiped across the holographic display, pulling up a star map smeared with red markers and blinking warnings. If we are to forge an alliance, we must first survive the Syndicate's attentions. Elias scratched his chin. You think they'll send assassins or just annoying bureaucrats with endless paperwork? Both are equally deadly. He laughed. I prefer the paperwork. At least with that, you know exactly when your death is scheduled. As the ship slipped through a shimmering curtain of cosmic dust, The AI piped up with an alert. Incoming transmission, encrypted and suspiciously dramatic. On screen, Thaladra commanded. A hologram flickered to life, displaying a grizzled face with one eye missing and a cybernetic implant that looked like a toaster. The man, Captain Jax Vor, grinned crookedly. Well, if it isn't the most unlikely couple this side of the Orion Rift, heard you've been making waves. Need some muscle? Elias exchanged a glance with Thaladra. Jax, always a pleasure. Yeah, well, less for me, I'm sure, Jax said, voice dripping with sarcasm. Word is, you're trying to turn enemies into friends. Bold move. Crazy, but bold. Thaladra's lips twitched. We have learned that in war, there are no true enemies, only former allies and future regrets. Jax chuckled. You've got spunk, Queen. All right, I'm in. But I warn you, my definition of muscle includes sarcasm and questionable decisions. Perfect, Elias said. That's the diplomatic corps in a nutshell. With their ragtag crew growing, the freighter jolted as sensors detected a nearby ship moving at sublight speed. Too fast for trade, too slow for patrol. Syndicate Scout, Thaladra said, eyes narrowing. Elias pulled up the defensive protocols. Shields up, evasive maneuvers. Let's see if we can outwit a predator with a license to kill. The freighter swerved, engines humming with a desperate energy that felt like the ship itself was holding its breath. The Scout fired, and a volley of plasma bolts ripped through the void, slamming into the hull with explosive force. Shields at 70%, the AI reported. Hull integrity compromised. Recommend countermeasures. Countermeasures engaged, Elias said, firing the ship's pulse cannons. Bright streaks of light traced paths toward the enemy vessel, which twisted and spiraled, trying to dodge. Thaladra's voice cut through the chaos, calm and commanding. Focus fire on their weapon arrays. Disable, do not destroy. We want information. Elias smiled despite the alarms blaring. So, a diplomatic shootout. I like it. The enemy ship faltered, its weapons going dark. The Scout veered off, retreating into the dark folds of space. Temporary victory, Thaladra said, but this war is far from over. Elias exhaled, running a hand through his messy hair. I don't know about you, but I'm beginning to think peace talks will require less shooting and more coffee. Thaladra's ears twitched in amusement. If only. As the stars streaked past, they settled into uneasy silence. The war outside still raging, but somewhere deep inside the freighter, something fragile and unexpected was beginning to take root. An alliance not just of necessity, but perhaps something more. The command deck buzzed softly with the low hum of the ship's core systems, the rhythmic pulse, a strange kind of heartbeat that made Elias feel more alive than he had in weeks. Across the console, Queen Thaladra was engaged in what appeared to be a fierce battle with the ship's navigation AI. Her long ears twitched as she swiped through holographic controls, muttering something about insufferable archaic protocols that sounded suspiciously like an alien curse. Elias leaned over, grinning. You know, if you ever want to overthrow your tech, I'm pretty handy with a plasma screwdriver. She shot him a sideways glance. A diplomat and a mechanic? You truly are a jack of all trades, Captain Wren. Master of none, he corrected with mock humility, though I do specialize in making terrible coffee and worse decisions. She chuckled, the sound lightening the thick tension that had been building between them since their last encounter with the Syndicate Scout. Your self-deprecation is as finely tuned as your negotiating skills. Hey, it gets results. Or at least it gets me out of trouble with a smile. A sudden beep interrupted their banter. The AI's voice, more librarian than ever, announced, Incoming encrypted transmission, classified as high priority and potentially disastrous. Thaladra's eyes narrowed. Let's hear it. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a shimmering image of an elder alien diplomat from the Galactic Council, a creature whose multiple eyes blinked in rhythm like a cosmic metronome. Queen Thaladra, Captain Wren, the diplomat intoned. Your actions have not gone unnoticed. The Council requests an immediate parley to discuss terms of ceasefire and alliance. However, be warned, the Syndicate of Cinders has infiltrated several council chambers. Trust is a precious commodity. Elias smirked. Trust? I thought that died somewhere around the last peace summit. Thaladra nodded slowly. Indeed. But perhaps this is the moment we forge something stronger than fear and suspicion? Elias tapped the console. So, a peace summit with potential backstabbers. Sounds like my kind of party. Be warned, Thaladra said, tone serious despite the humor. This meeting could decide the fate of millions, or our graves. They plotted a course to the neutral space station, where the parley would occur. A sprawling construct orbiting a dying star, bathed in the eerie glow of cosmic dust. As they approached, the station's defense turrets swiveled with lazy menace, tracking their every move. The docking was tense but uneventful, which was suspicious in itself. Inside the station, the air was thick with political intrigue and recycled oxygen. Representatives from dozens of species mingled, their voices a mix of languages, dialects, and veiled threats. Elias and Thaladra moved through the crowd, an unlikely duo whose alliance drew curious and wary glances. They entered the grand chamber, where the Galactic Council awaited, faces solemn beneath towering crystalline arches. The room was a kaleidoscope of colors and cultures, each delegate draped in regalia that shouted status louder than any words. The council leader, a towering figure with translucent skin, revealing flickering, bioluminescent veins, addressed them. Queen Thaladra, Captain Wren, we acknowledge your courage and the symbol your union represents. But symbols alone cannot end wars. We require concrete action and proof of commitment. Elias swallowed his nerves and stepped forward. We offer our alliance as a foundation, but we also bring intelligence on the Syndicate's plans to sabotage any peace efforts. We want to root out the rot. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Thaladra's gaze swept the room, long ears twitching as if detecting hidden signals. We propose a joint task force, combining our strengths and resources. Together we can dismantle the Syndicate's influence. One delegate sneered. And what guarantees do we have that this alliance will hold? That you won't simply shift power in your favor? Elias quipped. Well, I promise not to dance the ancient Vulnar ritual unless absolutely necessary. Laughter broke out, easing the tension like a sudden solar flare piercing through dark clouds. The council deliberated, long minutes stretching like light years. Finally, the leader spoke. We accept your proposal. Let this alliance be the beacon of hope in this dark time. Relief washed over Elias, but the moment was short-lived. A sudden explosion rocked the station. Emergency lights flashed as alarms screamed through the corridors. Syndicate attack, a voice shouted. Chaos erupted. Delegates scrambled for cover. Guards clashed with shadowy intruders, and Elias found himself gripping Thaladra's arm. Did we just get RSVP'd to a surprise party? She smiled grimly. Apparently, the Syndicate enjoys dramatic entrances. Together, they moved through the chaos, coordinating defenses, their bonds strengthening with each shared glance and shouted command. In that crucible of war and diplomacy, humor and hope became their weapons as much as lasers and shields. The war was far from over, but for the first time, the promise of peace flickered brighter than the dying star outside. The hum of the command deck had transformed from a nervous pulse to a steady rhythm, as if the ship itself had settled into a confident stride. Elias stood beside Queen Thaladra, watching the stars streak past the viewport. Their alliance, once a fragile thread woven from desperation and hope, had grown into a tapestry of trust, a thing both improbable and beautiful in the midst of war. You know, Elias said, breaking the silence, I never thought I'd be here, negotiating peace while engaged to a queen with the sharpest long ears in the quadrant. Thaladra's lips quirked into a smile. Sharp ears are necessary when dealing with endless human sarcasm. Ah, sarcasm. My first line of defense and often my last. Their laughter was interrupted by the AI's voice, suddenly cheerful. Captain, Queen, incoming message from the Galactic Council. They request your presence to finalize the peace accord. Elias exchanged a glance with Thaladra. Looks like we survived the Syndicate's surprise party invitation. Barely, she replied, but survival is our specialty. They arrived at the Council's orbital headquarters, a shining monument to unity amid the galaxy's scars. The chamber was filled with delegates, their expressions a mix of hope, skepticism, and cautious optimism. The air was thick with the weight of history about to be rewritten. As they stepped forward, Elias felt the enormity of the moment. A diplomat who had once stumbled through the corridors of power, now standing as a symbol of change, beside the alien queen who had shown him that strength often lay in vulnerability. The council leader, the bioluminescent figure from before, addressed the assembly. The alliance forged by Captain Wren and Queen Taladra has brought us to this pivotal moment. Today we put aside ancient grudges and declare an end to hostilities. Cheers rippled through the chamber, though tempered by the scars of loss. Elias cleared his throat. War taught me many things, but the greatest lesson is this. Love and trust are not weaknesses. They are weapons. We wield them together to build, not destroy. Taladra stepped forward, her voice clear and resolute. Our union was more than political. It was a vow of hope. We chose courage and vulnerability, and through it, we found strength. As the peace treaty was signed, Elias felt a weight lift, a burden borne not just by him, but by countless lives hanging in the balance. The war was ending, but their journey was just beginning. Later, in the quiet of their shared quarters aboard the freighter, Elias looked at Taladra, her long ears catching the soft glow of the starlight. Funny thing, he said, I proposed marriage in the middle of a war, thinking it was a desperate gamble. Turns out it was the smartest move I ever made. Taladra smiled, eyes shining with warmth and a hint of mischief. And I accepted, knowing that sometimes the boldest acts of diplomacy come from the heart. Elias took her hand. So, what's next for us? Peace? Diplomacy? Hopefully fewer explosions? She laughed softly. I wouldn't count on fewer explosions, but whatever comes, we face it together. In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where shadows of conflict still loomed, two souls had found a beacon, proof that even amid chaos, love could be a revolution. And with that, the stars outside seemed to shine a little brighter.